The courtroom was silent, except for the faint rustle of papers and the quiet hum of anticipation. All eyes were on the white-haired judge seated at the bench, his face etched with a mix of tension and remorse. The gavel, symbolic of justice, sat before him, untouched. In the gallery, murmurs of disbelief spread as the judge cleared his throat and began to speak. "I failed," he admitted, his voice shaking. "We failed, and for that I am deeply sorry." The apology, unexpected and raw, hung heavy in the air, resonating with everyone present. It was an acknowledgement of a decade of injustice, of a life shattered and pieced together through resilience. At the center of it all sat Maya Johnson, a black woman in her mid-30s. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the wooden table before her. She had spent the last 10 years behind bars for a crime she didn't commit, and now the words she had longed to hear were finally being spoken. Maya's story began in a small neighborhood on the outskirts of Atlanta, where she lived a modest but fulfilling life. A single mother of 2, she worked as a nurse, often taking double shifts to provide for her family. She was known in her community for her warmth, her laughter, and her unwavering dedication to her children. But all of that changed on a cold November night when a robbery turned violent, leaving a man dead and Maya wrongly accused. Despite having an alibi and no prior criminal record, the evidence against Maya was circumstantial at best. Yet it was enough to convict her in a system plagued by implicit biases and systemic failures. Witnesses misidentified her, forensic evidence was mishandled, and a prosecutor eager for a quick conviction painted her as someone she wasn't. The stakes were devastatingly high, not just for Maya, but for her children, who were thrust into foster care, and for a community that saw yet another Black life fall victim to a flawed justice system. The judge's apology was more than just an admission of guilt. It was a moment of reckoning, a rare acknowledgement of systemic racism and judicial error. But what led to this moment? What forced the truth to surface after so many years of silence? This story isn't just about Maya's wrongful conviction. It's a story of resilience, the fight for justice, and the power of accountability. It's a story that demands to be told because it echoes the experiences of countless others whose voices have been silenced. As the courtroom sat in stunned silence, the weight of Maya's ordeal became clear. This wasn't just her story. It was a mirror reflecting the failures of a system that was supposed to protect her. The night Maya Johnson's life unraveled began like any other. She had just finished a long shift at the hospital and stopped by a local grocery store to pick up some last-minute supplies for her children's school lunches. At the same time, across town, a liquor store robbery escalated into a violent altercation, leaving the store owner fatally shot. The description of the suspect, a Black woman wearing dark clothing, spread quickly, and a hastily assembled witness lineup pointed to Maya. She had no connection to the crime scene, but her location near the area and the unreliable accounts of panicked witnesses placed her squarely in the police's sights. Despite her protests of innocence, the arrest came swiftly. Maya was handcuffed in front of her children, their terrified cries echoing in the hallway of their apartment. "Mommy, where are they taking you?" her youngest son, just 6 years old at the time, screamed. Maya's heart broke, but she couldn't answer. She didn't know. The trial began months later, but for Maya, it felt like a mere formality. From the start, her public defender was overworked and underprepared, juggling dozens of cases simultaneously. Critical evidence that could have exonerated her, such as surveillance footage from her workplace, was either overlooked or dismissed due to technicalities. The prosecutor, on the other hand, painted Maya as a cold and calculating criminal, capitalizing on deeply ingrained racial stereotypes. The jury, predominantly white, seemed to have made up their minds long before deliberations began. "She fits the description," one witness confidently testified, even though the conditions during the robbery made accurate identification nearly impossible. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, Maya was convicted of felony murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The judge at the time, the same man who later issued the apology, appeared indifferent to her pleas of innocence. For Maya, it felt like the world had turned its back on her. Prison was a stark and brutal reality. Maya, who had never even received a parking ticket before, was thrust into a harsh environment where survival required strength she didn't know she possessed. She faced isolation, physical danger, and the constant burden of being labeled a murderer. Her children, the light of her life, were taken into foster care. Letters came sporadically at first, but as the years passed, the visits dwindled and the connection she cherished with her sons faded. "I can't be a mother from here," she once confided in a fellow inmate. "They're forgetting me, and I don't blame them." Yet, even in the darkest moments, Maya found ways to endure. She joined a prison education program, earning certifications in counseling and mediation. She became a mentor to younger inmates, helping them navigate the oppressive system. Despite the weight of her sentence, she refused to let her spirit break. But resilience didn't erase the pain. She mourned every missed milestone, birthdays, graduations, and the countless small moments that make a life. Maya's letters to her children remained hopeful, though each word carried the sting of regret. "One day we'll be together again," she wrote. "One day you'll know the truth." Maya's case was not an anomaly. It was a symptom of a deeply flawed system. The racial and gender biases that shaped her arrest and conviction were woven into the fabric of the justice system. Studies have long shown that Black women are disproportionately targeted by law enforcement and often face harsher penalties for crimes they didn't commit. The prosecutor in her case was praised for his high conviction rate, a metric that often came at the expense of justice. Evidence that might have exonerated Maya was either ignored or suppressed, and no one seemed to question the shaky foundation on which the case was built. Even the judge later admitted that he had failed to scrutinize the evidence thoroughly. "I relied on the system," he confessed during his apology. "I believed it would deliver justice, but I see now that it didn't." The prosecutor, who once confidently declared Maya guilty, defended his actions for years, claiming he acted in good faith based on the evidence presented. But as public scrutiny grew, his stance began to falter. "I did my job," he stated in an interview. "If mistakes were made, they were systemic." The judge, however, underwent a deeper transformation. Initially dismissive of Maya's appeals, he later became a vocal advocate for her exoneration. What changed? Was it the emergence of new evidence, or the mounting pressure from activists who refused to let Maya's case fade into obscurity? Maya's ordeal was a stark reminder of the human cost of systemic injustice. Her story was not just about a wrongful conviction. It was about the lives uprooted, the dreams deferred, and the families fractured by a system that prioritizes expediency over equity. As the courtroom waited for the judge to deliver his apology years later, the weight of those failures was palpable. This wasn't just about Maya anymore. It was about the countless others whose names may never be known but whose lives were equally shattered. 10 years into her sentence, Maya Johnson's case seemed destined to languish in obscurity. Her appeals had been repeatedly denied, and her story had faded from public memory. But everything changed when a young investigative journalist named Claire Bennett stumbled upon her case while researching wrongful convictions for a series on systemic injustice. Claire, armed with a relentless curiosity and a sharp eye for inconsistencies, was struck by the glaring gaps in Maya's trial record. The eyewitness testimonies were contradictory, and the forensic evidence had been poorly handled. How could this have been enough to convict someone? Claire wondered, her instincts telling her there was more to the story. Claire's initial investigation revealed troubling details. The primary witness, a store clerk, had recanted his testimony years earlier, claiming police coercion. Additionally, the forensic lab responsible for analyzing key evidence had been implicated in multiple scandals involving mishandled samples. Claire knew she needed to dig deeper. Her first major breakthrough came when she tracked down Maya's alibi, a former co-worker named Elena, who had provided a statement confirming Maya's presence at the hospital during the time of the crime. Elena's testimony had been dismissed during the trial due to a clerical error, but her recollection remained unwavering. "She was with me," Elena insisted. "I know it because we clocked out together." Despite Elena's corroboration, Claire faced significant roadblocks. The police department refused to release certain records, citing ongoing procedural reviews, and attempts to access case files were met with bureaucratic delays. But Claire wasn't deterred. Around the same time, Maya's case caught the attention of Anthony Reed, a civil rights attorney known for taking on wrongful conviction cases. Reed had successfully exonerated several other clients and was deeply familiar with the systemic issues that disproportionately affected Black defendants. Reed partnered with Claire, and together they began reconstructing the events leading to Maya's conviction. They uncovered suppressed evidence, including an alternative suspect who had been arrested for a similar crime just weeks after the liquor store robbery. That suspect's fingerprints were found on a weapon linked to the robbery, but this detail had never been presented in court. The discovery was monumental, but it wasn't enough to reopen the case. Reed needed something undeniable, something that couldn't be ignored. The turning point came when Claire uncovered an old storage facility housing evidence from closed cases. Among the dusty boxes, she found a small, mislabeled bag containing a piece of clothing worn by the victim during the robbery. DNA testing, unavailable during Maya's original trial, was now a standard practice. Reed petitioned the court to allow retesting of the evidence. Months of waiting culminated in a groundbreaking result. The DNA did not match Maya's profile. Instead, it pointed to the alternative suspect, who had been ignored during the initial investigation. The revelation sent shockwaves through the legal community. Reed immediately filed a motion for Maya's exoneration, and media outlets picked up the story, reigniting public interest. As progress mounted, so did resistance. The prosecutor's office, unwilling to admit fault, argued that the DNA evidence didn't conclusively prove Maya's innocence. The judge overseeing the motion delayed hearings, citing procedural concerns. Maya, who had dared to hope, found herself grappling with crushing disappointment. "It feels like every step forward comes with 2 steps back," she confided to Reed during a prison visit. "I don't know if I have the strength to keep fighting." Reed, too, faced personal and professional strain. Threats from detractors and pushback from legal institutions tested his resolve. But moments of support from Maya's family and community renewed his determination. The final breakthrough came unexpectedly. A retired detective, burdened by guilt, approached Claire with a confession. He revealed that during the original investigation, he had been pressured to close the case quickly due to political pressure from city officials. He admitted that he had overlooked critical evidence and had been complicit in coercing witness statements. This confession, combined with the DNA evidence and mounting public outcry, forced the hand of the legal system. The judge who had presided over Maya's original trial, now grappling with the consequences of his earlier inaction, agreed to hear the motion for exoneration. As the day of the hearing approached, emotions ran high. Maya's children, now teenagers, attended the hearing, their faces a mixture of hope and apprehension. Claire and Reed sat beside Maya, ready to present their findings. The courtroom was packed, with reporters, activists, and community members eager to witness what many hoped would be a moment of justice. When the judge finally declared Maya's conviction overturned, the room erupted in applause and tears. Maya, overwhelmed, embraced her children for the first time in years, her sobs of relief echoing through the chamber. The most unexpected moment came at the end of the hearing, when the judge, visibly emotional, addressed Maya directly. "I failed you," he said, his voice breaking. "And for that, I am deeply sorry. This courtroom, this system, we all failed you. I hope this moment marks the beginning of a better path for you and for others like you." His apology was met with stunned silence, followed by a standing ovation. For Maya, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served, but the scars of her ordeal would remain. The courtroom was filled to capacity on the day Maya Johnson's exoneration was finalized. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating a room heavy with anticipation. Activists, journalists, and community members sat shoulder to shoulder, their faces reflecting a mix of hope and determination. At the center of it all was Maya, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the defendant's table. The judge, the same man who had sentenced her a decade earlier, took a deep breath before delivering his decision. His voice, steady but tinged with emotion, rang out. "After reviewing the evidence, it is clear that a grave miscarriage of justice has occurred. Maya Johnson, I hereby vacate your conviction and declare you a free woman." The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment, suspended in disbelief. Then, like a dam breaking, the courtroom erupted. Applause, cheers, and tears of joy echoed through the room as Maya buried her face in her hands, overcome with emotion. Her children rushed forward, embracing her in a moment that felt like the culmination of a lifetime of waiting. For Maya, it was a surreal experience. She had dreamed of this day for years, but had never truly believed it would come. "I'm free," she whispered, the weight of the past 10 years lifting from her shoulders. But the day's most unexpected moment came when the judge stood again, his expression solemn. Addressing Maya directly, he said, "Ms. Johnson, there are no words that can undo the pain and suffering you have endured. As the judge who presided over your case, I must acknowledge my role in this injustice. I failed to scrutinize the evidence, to question the assumptions that led to your conviction, and to uphold the principles of justice. For that, I am deeply sorry." The room fell silent. The apology, delivered with a sincerity that even skeptics couldn't deny, felt monumental. The judge, once a symbol of the system that had failed Maya, now stood as a figure of accountability. Later, in interviews, the judge revealed what had motivated his apology. "Over the years, I've seen too many cases where the system prioritizes expediency over justice. Maya's case haunted me because it was a stark reminder of how easily lives can be destroyed when we don't demand better. I had to speak up. It was the least I could do." The judge's apology sparked a national conversation about systemic racism and wrongful convictions. It became a flashpoint for activists and policymakers who used Maya's case as a rallying cry for reform. Calls for changes in eyewitness identification protocols, evidence handling, and jury selection gained traction, with Maya's story serving as a powerful example of what was at stake. Nonprofit organizations dedicated to fighting wrongful convictions saw an outpouring of support, both financial and vocal. Community leaders began pushing for greater accountability within law enforcement and the judiciary, demanding transparency and fairness at every stage of the legal process. For Maya, the road to healing was just beginning. Freedom, while sweet, came with its own set of challenges. She had missed a decade of her children's lives and struggled to reconnect with them, especially her eldest son, who had grown resentful of a world that took his mother away. Therapy sessions, both individual and family, became a cornerstone of their healing process. Slowly, the walls between them began to crumble. Maya also leaned on her community, which welcomed her back with open arms. A neighborhood celebration in her honor marked her return, with banners that read, "Welcome home," Maya, strung across the streets. Maya found solace in sharing her story. She began speaking at events, advocating for criminal justice reform, and supporting other women who had experienced similar injustices. "I may have lost 10 years, she told a crowd at one rally, "but I refuse to let my story end there. If my voice can help someone else, then those years won't have been in vain." The judge's apology was both a beacon of hope and a stark reminder of the systemic flaws that allowed Maya's conviction to happen in the first place. For some, it symbolized progress, a rare acknowledgement of responsibility from within the judiciary. For others, it underscored the depth of the problem, raising questions about how many others like Maya remain behind bars. Critics argued that an apology, while powerful, wasn't enough. They demanded tangible reforms: mandatory bias training for judges and prosecutors, stricter standards for evidence admissibility, and independent oversight of wrongful conviction cases. Still, Maya's case became a catalyst for change. Several states introduced legislation aimed at preventing wrongful convictions, and the media's coverage of her story fueled public pressure to address systemic inequities. Despite the victory, the scars of Maya's ordeal were evident. Her children, though thrilled to have her back, bore the emotional weight of growing up without their mother. Financially, she faced hurdles, having lost a decade of earning potential. Yet she remained resilient, channeling her pain into advocacy. Maya also received a settlement from the state, acknowledging her wrongful conviction, though no amount of money could restore the years she had lost. "This isn't just about me," she said during an interview. "It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." As the years passed, Maya's story became a symbol of both the resilience of the human spirit and the urgent need for systemic reform. The judge's apology, once an unprecedented act, inspired others within the legal system to reflect on their own biases and shortcomings. Maya herself continued to advocate for change, working with organizations to provide legal assistance to those wrongfully convicted. Her efforts led to the establishment of the Johnson Foundation, which focuses on education, advocacy, and support for families impacted by incarceration. Through it all, Maya's message remained clear. We can't undo the past, but we can fight for a future where justice is truly blind. The weeks following Maya Johnson's release were a whirlwind of emotions. Freedom felt both exhilarating and overwhelming. Every ordinary task, shopping for groceries, walking in the park, or sleeping in a bed of her own, felt like a revelation. But the world she returned to was not the same one she left. Her children had grown older, their faces shaped by years she could never get back. The city had changed, too, with new buildings replacing familiar landmarks. Even Maya herself was different, wiser perhaps, but bearing the invisible scars of a decade spent behind bars for a crime she didn't commit. In the months that followed, Maya faced the arduous task of rebuilding her life. Finding work was challenging. Despite her exoneration, the stigma of incarceration lingered. Employers hesitated, and the gaps in her resume told a story that was hard to explain. But Maya was determined. With the support of community organizations, she secured a position at a nonprofit advocating for criminal justice reform. Emotionally, the journey was even harder. Therapy became a cornerstone of her healing process, helping her navigate the anger and grief that sometimes threatened to consume her. Forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook, she said during one session. It's about freeing myself from the weight of what they did to me. Her relationship with her children also required patience and effort. Her youngest, now a teenager, struggled to reconcile the mother he barely knew with the stories he'd heard. But through family counseling and countless shared moments, the bond slowly began to mend. The judge's apology, once viewed as a shocking act of accountability, became a catalyst for deeper introspection within the legal community. Judge William Price, now retired, dedicated his time to speaking at legal conferences, emphasizing the importance of humility and vigilance in the judiciary. I'll never forget Maya's face when I handed down that sentence, he admitted in one keynote speech. I convinced myself I was doing my job, but I failed to see the humanity in front of me. We cannot afford to let our biases go unchecked, not when the stakes are this high. His advocacy for judicial reform and implicit bias training garnered both praise and criticism for many. His transformation symbolized the possibility of change within a flawed system. Maya's case became a rallying cry for justice reform advocates across the country. National conversations about racial bias in the legal system gained momentum, fueled by her harrowing story. Several states introduced legislation aimed at reducing wrongful convictions, including measures to improve forensic evidence standards and establish independent conviction review units. Advocacy groups used Maya's story to push for mandatory training on implicit bias for law enforcement and judiciary members. Public awareness also surged. Documentaries, podcasts, and news specials delved into Maya's journey, bringing the issue of wrongful convictions to a global audience. Her story isn't just her own, said one journalist. It's a reflection of the systemic failures that affect thousands. Maya embraced her role as a voice for the voiceless. Through the Johnson Foundation, she worked tirelessly to support families of the wrongfully incarcerated. Her speeches, often raw and heartfelt, resonated deeply with audiences. One memorable moment came during a National Criminal Justice Reform Summit. Standing before a packed auditorium, Maya declared, "I'm not here because I want pity. I'm here because I want change." For every Maya Johnson who makes it out, there are countless others still trapped. We owe it to them to keep fighting. Her efforts bore fruit. The foundation provided legal aid to over 200 families in its first year, and its educational campaigns reached thousands more. Maya's advocacy also inspired a new generation of activists, many of whom cited her courage as their motivation. Maya's story spurred everyday citizens to take action. Communities organized fundraisers, awareness campaigns, and educational programs to tackle the root causes of systemic injustice. Conversations about race, class, and privilege, once avoided, became unavoidable in schools, workplaces, and homes. Her case also highlighted the power of grassroots movements. It was the tireless work of activists, journalists, and attorneys that uncovered the evidence leading to her exoneration. "This isn't just a story about failure," said one activist. "It's a story about what's possible when people refuse to give up." As the years passed, Maya's resilience became a beacon of hope. Her journey reminded the world that even in the face of unimaginable injustice, healing and transformation were possible. Standing on the steps of the courthouse where her life had been upended, Maya reflected on her journey. "I'll never get those 10 years back," she said to a crowd of supporters, "but I've gained something just as powerful, a purpose. Together, we can create a system that values truth over expediency, humanity over prejudice." Her words, like her story, carried weight. They inspired action, reflection, and a collective commitment to justice. Maya's story is not just hers, it's a call to all of us. A call to challenge biases, demand accountability, and fight for a legal system that serves everyone equally. It's a reminder that change is possible, but only if we're willing to act. Her resilience, the judge's apology, and the reform sparked by her case prove one thing: the pursuit of justice is a journey worth taking, no matter how long or difficult it may be.